How's it going, everyone? So this is a part two to a very lengthy message response from user Becky137. And I'm taking the time to do my best to succinctly respond because there's so much information in this. I don't know that I can fully flesh out every single response. But I think I can present information in such a way that it really ties together my thoughts on this area. And specifically, we're talking about voluntarism, anarchism, and how animals are treated, and we'll specifically dive into any sort of dichotomies or pluralities as to types of creatures and human interaction, and specifically we're talking about ones with central nervous systems versus ones that don't have such, dealing with pain, and talking about the state of human beings with respect to animals. So I am going to just address first and foremost this concept, and that is that one could be, of course, a voluntarist and someone who wishes to live a vegan lifestyle and encourage others toward that and toward reducing harm toward complex organisms, especially ones that feel pain. The philosophical issue that makes it problematic in terms of adopted belief set, I think is pretty clear on several prongs. As far as why it's only going to, I think in the long term, be effective as to humans, not so much animals in terms of treatment. First, when it comes to human beings and voluntarism, non-aggression principle. Part of the reason why the non-aggression principle and voluntarism is seen as an ethical norm that could be readily adopted is because human beings on the whole in general, this is not of course a universal truth or statement, there's always deviations, but human beings as a whole have the ability to give what's called reciprocity. The idea there is that one human can say, I'm not going to stab you, and the other human can say, I'm not going to stab you, and there could be an understanding about that, intelligent understanding, that creatures of lower intellect, especially as to dogs, maybe cats, dolphins, elephants, I'm talking about some of the more intelligent creatures in the animal kingdom, they can't do on the average for them. Of course, since this is all inducted, this is not going to be any sort of mandatory reasoning here, but rather I'm trying to pull together these points to kind of distinguish here between humans and animals and the issues that come up. Humans, as I mentioned before and repeat again, in the state of nature as far as this universe is concerned, as history has shown, they do require the death of living things in order to exist. That includes, at a minimum, plants, and as has been traditionally seen in order for humans to survive, animals. And that may not even be from the point of view of ingestion. It can be from the point of view of necessity for clothes or for tools in order to move up out of the jungle, out of hunter-gatherer. This isn't a universal truth for all humans across the globe, but it's been one that has been historically and scientifically shown to be true as far as human prosperity and growth. Subjugation of animals and plants leading to exponential produce, that is, when you have animals multiply, when you keep them in fenced cages and in stock, when you take crops and you begin to sow seeds in long rows and begin to mass produce, you get bountiful crops, you get bountiful amounts of animals and milk and meat, and surplus is what leads to the ability to devote human effort into outside arenas, improving technology, improving the way of life by doing things outside of getting food, water, and shelter for the day-to-day. Maybe in some alternate universe another means could have been reached, but as far as humans are concerned, it seems to be the truest, most genuine, way to key up and move up. And whether or not you believe in evolutionary biology doesn't really matter, because if you look at the state of animals, how they treat each other in terms of survival and in terms of upward mobility and dominant species and natural selection, you're going to notice that the animals among themselves do not follow the same ethical principles that are being espoused by people who wish to minimize violence against animals. I mean, it's not very hard to Google animals torturing, killing, maiming each other for food, for territorial dominance, and so on and so forth. It's an independent inquiry, of course, as to humans and treatment of animals, but that should be a keynote that, as far as animals are concerned, humans aren't exactly presenting them with a terrible plight or a terrible difference in terms of treatment as what they could find in nature. As disgusting as it may be, they suffer from fleas, ticks, parasites, competing predators. Really, I mean, this is something that is very observable, testable, repeatable. Human beings can, of course, evolve past that, and they could, of course, adopt principles past that. But to hold down principles that would, and this is the key part about voluntarism, would lead to justifiable use of defensive force gives a moment for pause as far as hypocrisy. And that's the real issue. It's very hypocritical to suggest that, and I don't know that this is necessarily your premise, Becky, but I have to put it in this way because that is the nature of making a philosophical argument for a code of conduct and ethics. If you're going to say people should move away from, harming animals as best they can, and you're going to put that as an ethical norm, you're also putting behind that the potential use of what's considered justifiable defensive force. That's what the non-aggression principle hinges itself on, that you don't initiate force, but if it is aggressed against you, that you have the ability to use defense against others, or protection of maybe somebody else with whom you're in privity with. And that's a big key difference between ethics as among humans and animals, because if you start to expand it and then someone adopts the mentality that they see somebody else's treatment of another animal as abuse, then it arises, at least according to what you consider creating an ethical code of norms, the concept that it could be justifiable to go and stop another human being from treating an animal a certain way. It could be justifiable to go and possibly use force against their human who's treating an animal a certain way. And I think that that is extremely difficult to meter out and not be hypocritical. And it's so philosophically tenuous because of the reciprocity and because of the hypocrisy as far as human existence is concerned, that to adopt it as a universal ethic or as an ethical norm for which you would consider, the ethical norm tenets to be on par with voluntarism, libertarianism, it's just to me, it's an impractical and hypocritical belief set or norm set. That said, it doesn't mean that that isn't something that could be worked on or worked toward. Absolutely, of course it could be. But again, if you're doing that, what's the reasoning behind it? What are the reasons why central nervous system creatures have protection and not something that's a little less, but still maybe can feel things or can respond to stimuli? Cellular dividing organism. But just because we as humans haven't been able to reach into its intellect yet, our technology is not advanced enough yet to see the depths of what it experiences, how does that make that construct more valid? Ignorance is not a construct for validity. Because we are ignorant of those other creatures' experience, because we say, well, we don't see a central nervous system, so okay, maybe they don't feel pain like we do, but well, what are they experiencing when they're stepped on, when they're crushed? I mean, if you ever see, as a kid, you might have seen ants getting stepped on by other kids, or like, you know, doing the magnifying glass and burning thing. It's not very hard to watch a creature writhe and to watch a creature, you know, make sounds that, to me, are about as anthropomorphic as the crying puppy. Because that's what it is at the end of the day. It's human selective empathy. The empathy reaches out for creatures that are more complex. They mimic human behavior closer or more closely. And so the empathy there is natural, as opposed to things that don't look like us, or things that, you know, are kind of ugly. Fish, right? A lot of people go fishing. Nobody thinks too much of it, you know, poking a hook and dragging an animal through the water. But if somebody does that to a puppy, I mean, they'll be, you know, World War III, right? So I want to make sure and make clear that selective empathy, without more, I think, is a philosophically dangerous ground, and it's not going to be a very strong ground for the long term. Again, differentiating from a personal policy of desiring to avoid hurting animals, a personal desire to avoid causing harm to animals in one's own actions, great. But when it comes into the gamut of philosophy and ethical norms, we have an issue as to other people, because the justifiable use of defensive force comes into play when you put that on the ethical norm, where it's like, oh my gosh, that's wrong, or that's considered defensible against. So, you know, those two big reasons. Again, reciprocity, state, did I say two? I did say three. State of human development as far as growing and arising out of the hunter-gatherer state, and the grounds on which you would move forward in trying to say that this should be an ethical ground, which, you know, true ethics that are adopted for the sake of reciprocity deal ultimately with consent and the use of justifiable force. Really, that's what it is. That's the elements of where voluntarism, you know, rubber meets the road. It's the concept of consent and the concept of the ability to have that reciprocity and the ability to then, of course, because of those understandings, be able to use justifiable force in the event that someone who has similar understandings or has the capacity for it breaks those, right? Yeah, the rapist might be a dummy, but everybody understands the ethical norm that rape lacks consent, and rape can be defended against physically. Cats don't have that. Dogs don't have that. They have some understandings. They can definitely have some incredibly intelligent understandings, but they lack what makes it so profound for humans to adopt. You know, and I can get it. I could understand empathetically why people don't want to see complex animals suffer, like dogs and cats. I completely get that, right? Who wants to make cats cry or dogs cry, whatever, right? I mean, it makes you feel bad, and the suffering is something that definitely connects humans to the outside world, with each other and of course beyond ourselves. So, I can understand it, but again, we're going to deal with firm philosophical grounds. If we're going to make a positive philosophy, I say positive mean adopted. I'm not claiming some natural philosophy. I'm not claiming, some God-based philosophy or some sort of interwoven universe philosophy. I'm just saying a philosophy that humans are going to take on and adopt and see as a norm. It is much more sound for humans to respect that as among each other with a defensible force. When you bring in animals, you bring in a whole other animal, to use the pun. Outside of that major point, let me see. I just want to make sure I don't miss something that is important. Here's a good question, right? And this is not a part of the major part, so if you stayed this long in this video, great for you, but you're going to get a good answer to the question. This person asked, do I think that a person, or that is she says a fetus is a person at moment of conception. Here's how I see it. I think that the scientific evidence is pretty clear that all the genetic material for what is a developing human being begins at conception. It's just there. The process of life is there. All the genetic material is there. I see that as a person. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the end of the discussion. I do find Walter Block's arguments convincing as to evictionism. So if you look into that, I think that is a very philosophically appropriate way to look at the situation. And from another tangential subject, I think that applying the evictionism actually works out quite well under a special circumstance that could be applied to parental rights / responsibilities. If women are seen as having the unilateral right over their bodies to make sure that, if there's something leaching onto them, that they're allowed to evict the best they can, unless, of course, technology allows the baby to be brought out and live. If that is the case, and women can have that choice, right, and seen as an ethical norm, then men should have no duty outside of a positive contractual agreement to provide support. So I just answered multiple questions, just that something that wasn't even asked here, but I think it's kind of a good thing to point out and put together. Do I think, again, conception, do I see that as the beginning of life? Yes. Do I see that somebody's there as, the end-all be-all for the equation? No. I do see that there is the issue that ultimately there is the woman's body aspect, and she has the choice whether or not that person gets to be sustained off of them. And really that stems or boils down to the right to the integrity of one's body as to other people. And I think that, and would hope that as technology progresses, that situation is alleviated and put down toward zero. That would be wonderful. I think that would be a great ethical norm to be pushing forward with technology, and that comes, of course, with education about birth control and technology that helps care of a child or an early birth of a child. I think that would be wonderful. I think moving away from that type of environment and trying to uphold both persons as best as possible is really the ultimate solution. But again, it's not just one person here, it's two people, and you can't just put the whole life of one person, I guess you could say, as the priority over another, when the other person is providing support for that life to begin with. And it's always going to be a testy situation. I don't like it, but I think that the compromise ethically should be there as far as parental rights and obligations are concerned. If you're going to take it and make it logically sound and round it off, that's I think the best way to go. But again, all that other stuff goes into deeper things about morality, which I don't tend to deal with as much. I try to deal with things in terms of ethics. But I hope that answers your question, because I know that it was very long. And I posted down below just so people could see all the different aspects to that. Like, that is the main question. But I can't get into all of those things, without just really honing in on what the core is with the philosophy and the issues that arise if you try to support veganism as a ethical norm against which is justifiable to force. And again, I have to be clear, because I just don't want to say that I'm straw manning your position, but I think that based on the extreme of that adopted belief, that is the ethical norm elevation. You're not just saying, oh, this is for me, myself, this is my personal choice about, like a religious belief or something like that. This is my choice about veganism, and everybody else can, do what they want. If they, if they want to kill animals and eat them, fine, I do veganism. But if it's about, you can use just about forcing against another person and say, I'm going to take your cow, or I'm going to take your horse, I'm going to take your dog, or I'm going to take your cat, issues start to arise. All right, thanks everyone. Talk to you later.